In the winter of 1802, the air in the Tuileries Palace felt thick, still carrying the residue of revolution while pregnant with the nascent grandeur of empire. Napoleon Bonaparte, First Consul and a man palpably aware of his ascending trajectory towards absolute power, hosted a private salon. The chamber flickered under the unsteady glow of oil lamps, casting long, dancing shadows across opulent furnishings. Among the assembled intellects was Pierre-Simon Laplace, the preeminent mathematician, physicist, and astronomer whose monumental work, Mécanique Céleste, had recently astounded the scientific world. His complex calculations seemed to render the heavens not as a realm of divine mystery, but as a vast, intricate clockwork, calculable, comprehensible, and fundamentally deterministic. Napoleon, a man perpetually fascinated by brilliance and obsessed with order, whether on the battlefield or in the cosmos, had studied Laplace's treatise with the intensity of a general analyzing terrain. He saw in it clarity, precision, and predictive power. He had summoned the scientist not merely for obligatory praise, but to probe the philosophical bedrock beneath the elegant mathematics. After initial pleasantries and a brief, practical discussion on potential military applications for improved astronomical prediction, perhaps aiding naval navigation or artillery calculations, Napoleon steered the conversation towards the profound. "Monsieur Laplace," Napoleon began, his voice holding its characteristic tone of command even in intellectual discourse. He lifted the weighty first volume of Mécanique Céleste from a nearby table. "You have penned this exhaustive, truly magnificent treatise on the mechanics of the universe. 5 volumes detailing the intricate dance of planets and comets. A remarkable achievement." He paused, carefully turning a few pages, his eyes scanning the dense equations. "And yet," he continued, his gaze locking onto the scientist, "throughout this vast exploration of the celestial order, I find not a single mention of its architect. No reference to the creator." Laplace, standing with the quiet dignity of a man secure in his intellectual domain, offered a slight, composed smile. This was a query he had perhaps anticipated, a natural question arising from the collision of his work with established doctrines. "Sire," he replied, his voice calm and measured, betraying no hint of theological defiance, only scientific conclusion. "I had no need of that hypothesis." A heavy silence descended upon the immediate circle. Napoleon, a man who had ridden waves of chaos and fortune, who believed deeply in will, strategy, and the tangible levers of power, was nonetheless struck by the sheer bluntness of the statement. He had manipulated religious sentiment, understood its utility in governing the masses and legitimizing rule, even signed the Concordat with the Church. While perhaps not devout in a traditional sense, God remained a useful variable in his political equations. "No need." Napoleon pressed, leaning forward slightly, his Corsican intensity sharpening his features. "An audacious claim. Are you suggesting, monsieur, that this intricate clockwork wound itself? That the precise orbits, the gravitational balance holding stars and planets in their courses, simply happened without a guiding intelligence?" Laplace elaborated, moving beyond the succinct, now famous reply. "Sire, my work demonstrates that the laws of gravitation and motion, as elucidated by the great Newton and refined through rigorous mathematical analysis, are sufficient in themselves to explain the observed movements of the celestial bodies. Their past states, their present configurations, and indeed, their future positions can be deduced from these fundamental laws and their current conditions. Once the initial state of the system and the governing physical laws are known, the subsequent state follows inexorably, mathematically. Introducing a creator, a prime mover external to the system, adds no explanatory power to the mechanics themselves. It does not refine our predictions nor simplify the calculations. Within the framework of celestial mechanics, it remains an assumption that, while perhaps comforting, is not mathematically or physically necessary." Napoleon absorbed this, his mind racing. "Inexorably. Mathematically. You speak of prediction. If these laws are so absolute, Monsieur Laplace, does this imply perfect predictability?" If Napoleon leaned in further, his imagination clearly captivated. If one possessed an intellect vast enough to know the precise location and momentum of every single particle in the universe at one specific instant, could this intellect, using your laws, truly calculate the entire future? The trajectory of every star, every planet, every atom, every human action. Laplace met Napoleon's intense gaze directly. He recognized the logical endpoint of his deterministic worldview. Theoretically, sire, yes. That is the implication of a purely mechanistic universe governed by immutable laws. Let us imagine, Laplace continued, articulating the concept that would later be termed Laplace's demon, an intelligence which could know, at a given moment, all the forces that animate nature and the respective positions of all the entities composing it. If, furthermore, this intelligence were vast enough to submit all this data to analysis, it could encompass in a single formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the lightest atom. For such an intelligence, nothing would be uncertain. The future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. The human mind, in the perfection it has managed to give to astronomy, provides merely a faint outline of such an intellect. Napoleon fell silent again, contemplating the staggering implications. A universe stripped of chance, of divine intervention, potentially even of meaningful free will. A cosmos unfolding with the predictability of a complex machine. Was his own rise, his victories, his very ambition merely the predetermined outcome of prior causes, calculable by a sufficiently vast mind? The thought was both exhilarating in its suggestion of cosmic order and unsettling in its potential diminution of individual agency. A universe ruled by calculation, Napoleon mused aloud, more to himself than to Laplace. But if all is determined, monsieur, what then becomes of morality? Of responsibility? Of the foundations of good and evil? If a man's actions are but the inevitable consequence of the particles composing him and the forces acting upon him, how can society hold him accountable? Where does your concept of the good fit within this grand, unalterable equation? Laplace remained unwavering. The good, sire, and the foundations of morality emerge not from divine command descending from on high, but from the observable nature of sentient beings. We are creatures capable of reason, empathy, experiencing suffering, and harboring hope. Morality, I contend, is discovered, much like a physical law, through experience and reason. We learn that certain actions lead to societal harmony and well-being, while others lead to suffering and discord. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, acts as a powerful governing force in human society, analogous perhaps to how gravity governs the stars. Our moral codes, our laws, our sense of justice, these are pragmatic systems developed by societies to navigate the complexities of interaction, to minimize harm and foster cooperation, based on the predictable consequences of actions within the natural and social world. The fact that an action might be determined within a causal chain does not negate its consequences, nor does it remove the necessity for social structures to guide behavior for the collective good. Gravity determines the fall of a stone, yet we still build walls and bridges, sire. This response, grounding morality in observable human nature and societal necessity rather than divine fiat, resonated deeply with Napoleon's pragmatic worldview. He saw the church, the state, the law, not as timeless, divinely ordained entities, but as functional structures, human constructs designed for order and control. Perhaps necessary stages in civilization's development, but not its ultimate, immutable expression. As the evening concluded and the guests began to depart, Laplace left with the quiet assurance of a man whose confidence rested on the bedrock of mathematical proof and observable reality. Napoleon remained, pacing thoughtfully in the shadowed chamber, the silence now feeling more profound than the roar of cannons on a victorious battlefield. His thoughts drifted inevitably to his planned coronation. The Pope, Pius VII, would be present in Paris, a significant political concession. Yet, Napoleon had already decided upon a radical, symbolic act. He would take the imperial crown from the Pope's hands and place it upon his own head. He would crown Josephine himself. No intermediary. No explicit divine sanction required at the critical moment. An act of self-creation, of self-legitimization. In that planned gesture, he now recognized the political echo of Laplace's cosmological argument. The Pope, in that moment of coronation, was becoming an unnecessary hypothesis for the establishment of his ultimate authority. Just as Laplace argued God was an unnecessary hypothesis for the functioning of the cosmos, perhaps God was also becoming an unnecessary hypothesis for the legitimacy and functioning of his empire. His rule derived from military success, political maneuvering, popular support, however engineered, and the sheer force of his will, from power, reason, and tangible control. God had been a convenient, often powerful hypothesis, useful for consolidating power and inspiring the populace, but perhaps, like the Pope's role in the crowning, no longer structurally essential to the edifice he was building. He gazed through the tall palace windows at the clear winter night sky. The stars, cold and distant, wheeled in their ancient, predictable patterns, exactly as Laplace's equations described. "I require no pope to place this crown," he murmured softly into the darkness, "and perhaps..." He paused, the thought solidifying. Perhaps the universe requires no God to justify its existence, nor I a God to justify my conquests. The heavens continued their silent, measured dance, indifferent, precise, governed by the laws Laplace had worked so tirelessly to unveil. And Napoleon Bonaparte, embracing the deterministic implications alongside his own towering ambition, turned from the window. He felt a profound, almost chilling, understanding crystallize within him. If greatness existed, perhaps it was not bestowed by divinity, but was rather an emergent property of the universe's relentless mechanics, seized by those with the will and intellect to master its forces. He would not supplicate. He would calculate, command, and conquer. In a clockwork universe, perhaps the greatest power belonged to the one who best understood and manipulated the gears. He would not seek divine favor, he would strive to embody an inevitable historical force.